Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I am Tyler Osby.
And today we're doing our last part on Naughty Dog, correct? This is the last one.
That's right. That's the last one because we're starting to get past the history of Naughty Dog and more into just the present day. And this is a history podcast.
That's right. We're not a present day podcast. There's so many of those.
That's right. And I should also mention that I'm following along very closely to an article that IGN wrote that is on the history of Naughty Dog. And this is also where they end their article. And so anything that I dig up by myself will be much less interesting than what I can find in addition to what IGN has done. So I want to say thank you to IGN for putting that article together. And hopefully we can do a little bit of justice for this last episode of the history of Naughty Dog on this podcast. I didn't know where I was going with that.
That's great. It's great. I like this ending. I like it. Let's get started. I'm so excited.
All right. So we rejoin our heroes after a successful 6th generation of video games. I wrote 6th generation, and now I have to Google it and make sure that that is correct. So the PlayStation 2 was, no, not the PlayStation 21. The PlayStation 2 was part of the...
I thought that was a
6th
burp.
generation. Yes. No, it was not a burp.
But it was an
I typed in PlayStation 2, and the first article that comes up on Wikipedia is PlayStation 4, and I had to scroll down like 6 articles before I found PlayStation 2. Anyway, 6th generation. Okay, so Jak and Daxter had done extremely well on the PS2, and they were one of the system's highlight series, especially in that platformer genre. So back when they made Crash, remember, we're gonna go back a little ways here, they figured that there were 2 ways to make 3D platformer games. Crash style, with like linear levels where you run forward, or the style of like Super Mario 64, which is what that open world stuff is. So for Crash, they chose to go the sort of 2D, it's 2D sort of game design, but like running down a Z-axis there, so it's like technically 3D. But for Jak and Daxter, they went to that Super Mario 64 style open world with tons of explorations because they'd done that Crash style already. And on the PS2, they made even more platformers, but they changed their style to this open world. And those games are awesome. So they did the same thing that they'd done on the PlayStation 1, which is they made a trilogy of games plus a kart racer for Jak and Daxter. The formula was working, but it wasn't going to work any longer. The period of time between Naughty Dog's PS2 and PS3 games is one of the most tumultuous times in the company's history. To make matters worse, at this point, they'd gone from being a one-project studio to splitting the studio in half to make 2 projects. The first of these projects would go on to be the Uncharted series. The second would sort of eventually morph to become The Last of Us, like way later on. But at this point in time, it was a PSP game. They were starting to make a game for the PlayStation Portable. So, and also at this time, Andy and Jason also finally stepped away from like the day-to-day inner workings of the studio. So they weren't really running the show anymore. They didn't really have a whole lot of input on a lot of stuff. The company sort of runs itself. I think after a certain amount of time, the founders of a studio kind of have to do that. They have to sort of step aside and let somebody who at least knows how to run a company come in. They don't necessarily have to leave entirely. And again, this is all just my opinion. I don't think they necessarily need to leave entirely because you kind of want to retain what made the studio so great in its early days. But eventually, the parts, there's like the game making part, which is everything that you do when the company is small. And then there's the running the company. And as the company gets bigger, which is necessary to continue making awesome games and to continue outdoing yourself, the company sort of has to get bigger. And what ends up happening is those huge parts of just running the company start to kind of weigh on you. And you're not really there to do what you started to do, which is make games. So I think it's good that Jason and Andy took a step back from the day-to-day operations and into a more like creative sort of consulting role. But changing leadership like that doesn't help when you're already in a huge transitional period. So that's just one other thing on the pile at this point. The future was uncertain, even for a proven developer like Naughty Dog. And so it makes sense that they'd lose a lot of people during this time. Actually, about 25 people left the company between Jak X, Combat Racing, and Uncharted. They moved on to other companies. And it didn't really feel great for the people who were left behind because they were kind of feeling pretty bad that all their friends were leaving. And so like even the people who stayed behind like were kind of feeling bad, you know? You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Imagine how it would be if we were like, you know what? We're going to step aside from this podcast. We've gotten so successful. We hired other people to be us.
That's right. Weird. We hired other people to be us, and we went on to play a more consulting role for a lot of other podcasts.
Behind the
I don't know.
scenes, talking about their podcasts. You know what I mean?
That's the goal here. That's where we're headed, you know?
We're very meta in that way.
Yeah, that's right. Also, at this period of time, the engine that they had been using for all of their PS2 games was basically made solely by Andy. He was a wizard programmer who was super good at everything, and he just basically made like the whole engine. And he was the only one who really knew how to work on it or how to extend it, and he used a bunch of weird programming languages that nobody else in the company really knew. So in between this time, even all the stuff that they had done up to that point, like the tech and the tools that they had built, they kind of just had to scrap it and start over for the PlayStation 3. Yeah. So I think a lot of companies probably had to do that. The PlayStation 2 and 3 are not like very similar systems to develop for. I have a feeling that there's a lot of technology from a lot of companies that didn't really transfer over perfectly cleanly, but it didn't help that Andy had stepped back and been like, okay, have fun with all this stuff. And people were like, I don't know what to do with this. And so they just sort of got rid of it and started over. So a lot of new beginnings for the company, you know? So instead of using Andy's tech from the good old days, which they were super proud of, they decided to move to more industry standard generic tools for building games. These kind of tools are known as middleware. And during this period of game development between the PS2 and PS3, middleware became much, much more widespread. That's not to say that it didn't exist before in previous generations, but at this point, there was kind of a whole industry of developers just making tools for other developers to use when making their games. So if you've ever seen, like, if you start up a game, you've seen like the Havoc physics logo or the Scaleform logo or stuff. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. It's like somebody else has made a physics engine and that's all they do is make physics engines. And so it makes sense for a game developer to, instead of making their own physics engine, to just buy one that has already been made that they don't have to maintain. And like, there's a lot of good reasons to do that.
Yeah, save yourself some time and money.
That's right. Save yourself some time and money. A lot of companies, we'll dig into this a little bit later, but a lot of companies can get into this like not invented here syndrome where they get like really wary of using stuff that was not made by them and for them. And sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's good to like get exactly what you want and make it yourself. Other times, you know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again. You know, you can kind of use something that somebody else is using and rely on them for that. So.
Now, Tyler, are we going to reinvent the wheel and make Jaybird remastered, or are we going to buy something?
Well, yeah. There is no currently existing software system that could handle what we need for the Jaybird remake.
That's
so
true.
We would absolutely have to invent a whole probably new programming languages. We may need to invent some hardware for it too.
We're probably going to have to wait a couple generations too, just like consoles in general. You know what I mean?
Yep, that's right. We're going to have to. This is when everything is streamed like Google Stadia. Then we'll run it all in the cloud, our own cloud. Obviously, we're making our own cloud.
The J Cloud.
The J Cloud. That's right.
I'm into it.
J Cloud. J stands for Jaybird. J stands for John Glames. You know,
the J's.
We're all in on J Cloud.
I'm legally changing my name to John Glames. I hope everyone's okay with that.
Yeah, that's great. I'm very excited for that. Naughty Dog also during this time became proponents of the ICE initiative, which is nothing to do with border control or anything like that. It stands for Initiative for a Common Engine.
That'd be a crazy left turn we would take if we just did that right now.
So they decided to stop making video games, and this just set up a lot of stuff along the southern border. The goal of the Initiative for a Common Engine was to get all of Sony's first-party studios on the same kinds of tools, because that would make it easier for all these studios to share their technology and help each other get better. This makes sense for Naughty Dog, considering their history of sharing technology with other devs. I remember they shared some stuff with Insomniac. The Ratchet and Clank games used some of that tech that Naughty Dog had made, and then Insomniac made improvements to that technology and shared it back with Naughty Dog. So everybody makes great games, everybody benefits. It worked out really well for those two studios, so why not extend that to other first-party Sony studios? And also, the PlayStation 3 was just generally much harder to develop for, so again, if somebody else has done the thing that you're trying to do, don't need to reinvent the wheel. Go use what they did. Learn from them. Build on top of what they already have. Save your cycles to make that stuff better instead of having to make the same stuff over and over again.
I like that. That's a good plan.
Yeah, but agreeing to be part of the initiative for a common engine was also helpful to Naughty Dog in another way. It got them access to the PlayStation 3. And so we're talking like 2005, 2006 time period. And the PlayStation 3 was awesome. And getting access super early also meant that they got a head start on the development community. So they were able to make a lot of technical strides on things like Uncharted that other developers wouldn't have been able to do until later in the PlayStation 3's lifespan. So they got like a good year or two head start on developing for the PlayStation 3.
I forgot we're going to talk about Uncharted this episode. I just got really excited. I completely forgot we're talking about that this episode.
I love Uncharted. So ultimately, while they had to throw everything out that they had ever done up to this point in order to build things for the PlayStation 3 in the same ways that other developers were doing it, it was good for them because they were able to be a lot more efficient in the long run. But it was super painful at this time, which again is when Jason and Andy are leaving. We're switching technologies, like all kinds of things. Like people are leaving. We're not sure what's even going to happen next because it's not like they just one day decided on making Uncharted. Like there's a whole process of like uncovering, basically like finding this game and like deciding what you want to do next, especially when it's a game that's in a completely different genre. It's got to be more realistic. It's all kinds of stuff. So, remember when I said that they had split their console teams up?
Yes, I remember that, Tyler.
Yeah, so they had their PlayStation 3 teams working on Uncharted and kind of sort of doing Last of Us. Not really a whole lot of Last of Us stuff going on right now, but they also had that team working on the PSP game that I was talking about, and that game was the one that was going to continue the story of Jak and Daxter. And I'm not talking about Daxter, the other PSP game that was made by Ready at Dawn that takes place between the first and second Jak and Daxters, and it's all about Daxter rescuing Jak.
I remember that.
At the beginning of Jak 2, yeah.
And it's before Jak becomes a bad boy, because doesn't Jak become a bad boy? Do a full character turn?
He goes full like dark side. So that's a great game. Daxter is made by Rated Dawn, but it's not the game I'm talking about. I'm talking about another Jak project that ultimately got canceled at Naughty Dog, but would go on to eventually be finished by High Impact Games, which is the studio that made the two Ratchet and Clank games on PSP, so Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank. This game would eventually become Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier a few years later. I think it came out in like 2009, so this was a while later. It's funny, it was like a PSP and PS2 game that came out in 2009, years after the PS3 had already been a thing, which is nuts to me. And I remember playing this game a little bit because it came out on the PS2, and it was kind of neat, but it focused a lot on airships and flying those around. And while I think it was pretty good for what it was in that sense, I just wasn't as into it as the platforming. So,
Isn't it kind of weird that the PlayStation 2 had such a long lifespan? They were still making games for it in 2009.
Yeah, I think the last game to officially launch on the PlayStation 2 was in Brazil, and it was FIFA 14.
Wowzers.
Yeah, the PS2 had an exceptionally long lifespan in Brazil particularly. I'm not sure why. I think maybe there were some import restrictions going on the PlayStation 3. I'm not really exactly sure. But I do know that the PS2 in Brazil got a Netflix disc. That's how long it sort of lasted. Like it got a disc for streaming Netflix to it.
Do you think there was someone on a beach in Brazil just playing their PS2? I hope so. I think that's real.
I think so.
People playing beach volleyball next to them, and they're just sipping on a tropical drink. I don't know, pina colada maybe, and then playing Jak and Daxter: The Lost Frontier.
And watching Lost on Netflix. Well,
they go back and forth
2009
too.
So it was kind of neat, but it was like fine, I guess. But the reason they abandoned it mostly is because they really just weren't equipped to work on two separate projects at the same time, and it was pretty clear that the Uncharted project needed the extra hands. Now this is where Amy Hennig comes in.
A new challenger appears.
A challenger approaches, Amy Hennig. And she'd been around Naughty Dog for a little bit. She was a director on Jak 3. So she brought tons of industry experience coming in. She had more than a decade of experience coming in. I think she started in the industry in 1989. So this was in Jak 3 would have been 2004. So about 15 years of experience at that point in time. But where she really stepped up to the big leagues was with Uncharted. She was the head writer for the first 3 games in the Uncharted series. And I think anybody who's played those games can agree she crushed it. It's a great job. Like I just love all those games. I love the storylines in all of them. She also had a degree in film and a huge interest in making films. And so I think that really helped in making Uncharted like the sort of cinematic experiences that they turned out to be. Gosh, I love those games.
You want to hear an upsetting fact about me?
Yeah.
I've only played the first opening sequence of Uncharted 3.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I never owned a PlayStation, but my friend let me borrow his. And then I was playing it, and he gave me The Last of Us, and he gave me Uncharted 3. And I got like an hour into each of those games, and then he called me like 2 days later, like, "Hey man, I know I said you could borrow that for like a month, but I actually need it back." It was the worst.
Oh, that's so sad.
I got
But
bamboozled.
you're so lucky though, because you can play those games for the first time now.
That's true.
And
I'm gonna fly
I hope
down
you
to
do.
you, and I'm gonna just lay in your family room area and just play these games. And
If you ever need an excuse to buy a PlayStation 4, the Uncharted collection is on PS4, and it's definitely the best way to play those games.
Oh, okay. So don't
They're all
fly
fantastic.
down to your house. Got it.
No, just buy a PlayStation 4. It's probably cheaper than a plane ticket.
And then fly down to your house.
Yeah, bring it with you.
Live
and
in
then we'll
your
play
living
together.
room.
Yeah,
Nope.
that's
I'm
fine.
gonna keep the door closed. I'm gonna be by myself in your house.
In my living room. Okay. Go away. I'm playing Uncharted.
Leave me alone, Tyler. And you're like, "You've been here for 3 weeks." I'm like, "It's fine. I'm good."
Well, if you've lived under a rock for the past decade, here's sort of a synopsis or a summary of the Uncharted series. It stars Nathan Drake, a young treasure hunter who raids tombs and solves supernatural mysteries, kind of like Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones combined into a video game. They're like third-person shooters. They have a lot of cover mechanics, so very similar to something like Gears of War, or I think they were more heavily inspired by Killswitch that had come out at the time. Like the cover system in Killswitch was something that they were all really excited about.
Whatever
And
happened to Kill Switch? Is it still a thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the one game happened. I think that's it, though.
That was it? Oh, for some reason,
Yeah,
I thought
I
they
never
had more
played
than
it.
that. It was pretty popular, I thought.
Well, I guess not that popular.
Ugh, yeesh. Sorry, Kill
Yikes.
Switch.
Oof.
Guess I really turned the kill switch on Kill Switch just now. My bad.
Got him. Nice.
Boom roasted.
Brr, brr, brr. But yeah, every single Uncharted game is worth playing. All of them. They just get better and better. Like 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to Lost Legacy. They all just continuously get better and better. Even though I am including Lost Legacy in this, even though that one doesn't star Nathan Drake, and it's also really good. You should also play that one.
I've heard that one is very good.
Yeah,
That's
it's
where
a little
you're
bit shorter.
Is it the two characters? It's not Sully. It's the. Is it who do you star as?
You play as Chloe and Nadine. Chloe
That's
is
right. Okay.
I think Chloe is first introduced in the second game as kind of the love interest, and she sort of comes back. And then Nadine, I think, is introduced in the fourth game.
Is Sully? Do you ever play as Sully in the games?
I don't think so.
Oh, maybe I just had that in my head for some reason.
Yeah.
Are we gonna get
Sorry,
to the?
bud.
I wanted to ask you a question. Are we gonna get to The Last of Us this episode?
No, we're not.
Okay. Can I tell you my weird Last of Us anecdote right now? Then.
Yes.
So apparently, The Last of Us actually has a thriving multiplayer community. Did you know this? I didn't know.
Really?
this.
I've never played the multiplayer in that game.
There's actually a decent amount of people that continuously play The Last of Us multiplayer. Yeah. And a guy I worked with when I lived in LA was super into it. And the only thing I remember from it is he kept calling it TLOW, even though that's not the right acronym for it. The Last of Us is it would be TLU.
TLU, yeah.
But he always called it TLOW. And so anytime someone says The Last of Us, I go TLOW, and I'm like, no, don't do that. Yeah, The Last of Us, I guess, is still technically kind of a modern game because the sequel comes out next year.
Comes out soon, and it was on. I mean, it came out on the tail end of PlayStation 3, but it was also the PS4 version is definitely the better version, and you can kind of tell that when you play it on PS3, you can kind of tell like, oh, this game should not be on PS3.
It's a little bit of a slog.
Yeah. Did you ever play the original Destiny on 360 or on PS3?
No,
It's bad.
Yeah. You ever played Destiny 2 on an original Xbox One? Because you'll get the same experience. Oh boy.
Also bad.
Yeah, also bad.
But yeah, so let's get back to Amy Hennig. She also worked on the Legacy of Kain games, like Soul Reaver. I think there's a couple other ones too. Those are games that I haven't played, but I've really been meaning to. They're supposed to have a really, really good storyline, and I am just such a sucker for a good storyline.
Aren't they kind of scary?
Games.
Are they kind of scary?
I think so. They're like kind of vampire-y, I think.
Oh, man, I don't know if I can play them. I get scared easily. We all know that.
Yeah. Yeah. But she had a bunch of friends and colleagues that had left all these other studios that she had been at to come to Naughty Dog. And so she was like, all right, fine. Let's go see what all this Naughty Dog hype is about. So she joined Naughty Dog. And so there, to give a little bit more context on Uncharted and the world that it was in, there are a lot of other games that are kind of in that world, like these drab, sort of dull third-person shooters. The new Tomb Raider games hadn't come out yet, but they were still kind of looking at some of the older ones for inspiration. You had like Gears of War, which is a sort of third-person shooter, gritty thing. Naughty Dog went through a lot of ideas. They even had one that was like very BioShock-like, which is also a series we should do a history
goodness. It's going on my list right now. Why is it not on my list? I'm so silly. They announced BioShock, the next BioShock.
Yeah. But it's like not, it doesn't have Ken Levine involved, and it's not made by the same people, so it's just BioShock kind of in name right now.
And they were also talking about it's going to be like probably 2 to 3 years before we see anything about it.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, that's cool. But
which is fine. I mean, it's kind of going to be like a thing where I feel like people are going to, it's going to be in the area where it comes out and people aren't going to remember the old BioShock. There'll be people that never played the old BioShocks.
Yeah, that's true. That game is, I mean, it's more than 10 years old now, so.
Could be a reboot coming up, is what I'm saying. Watch out,
could
world.
Be. Yeah, could be. But anyway, they thought about making a sort of like underwater, like claustrophobic BioShock-like thing, and then they were like, oh, thank God we didn't do that, because then BioShock did it, and they did it way better than we would have done it. So
BioShock is great.
It is fantastic. And they eventually settled on what would become Uncharted. And now, the way Uncharted sort of differentiates itself from the pack is by being a serious story that doesn't take itself too seriously. There's a lot of jokes, a lot of moments of levity, but it was also kind of the next logical evolution for their characters if you look at what Naughty Dog had worked on before. So we had Crash, who's basically a cartoon character. His motivations are, save the princess, save the world, like whatever. And then Jak and Daxter in the first game were kind of like that. But then, especially in Jak 2 and 3, they started to explore the characters and like the motivations and what makes these characters tick. That's why they made Jak speak in the second and third game. And so they had Jak, who was like experimented on, and like he kind of gets real mad, and so being mad is sort of a compelling like character.
I think so.
I suppose. Yeah,
definitely.
So they've been making this journey into more narratively driven stories for a while. It is hard to say this enough. They spent a really, really long time between Jak X and Uncharted, just getting together ideas for the game and putting it all together. I think even before Jak X had come out, when they kind of knew the PlayStation 3 was sort of going to be a thing, and they knew they wanted to make something next gen. They spent a lot of time on Uncharted, just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what worked. But once they settled on the genre, Amy Hennig drew heavily from the media of her youth, both from the 80s, but also things much earlier than that. So she started watching and reading and consuming tons of like this sort of pulp adventure fiction stuff. So we're talking like Indiana Jones, and we're talking all kinds of like really, really old stuff, even stuff that was like before her childhood too. But kind of what she put together after like consuming all of this media, she put together kind of what she called a parts list, or everything she thought this genre, like a story in that genre, needed. And so they actually still have that list, and they're still kind of working, like checking things off that list as they go today. And she said she calls them tropes, but she doesn't want to think of them as this like overdone cliche kind of thing. It's just, these are the story elements that make this genre. And so how do we take these things that we know we need and like make them fresh and make them feel good and new and exciting, which I think they really nailed with Uncharted. Like they didn't do anything like anything brand new. They just drew from so much stuff that was already so good and just like picked the best of that and just put it all together. It's like kind of a greatest hits of that genre, and I love it. I think it's great.
No, I just think they like. Do we have Nazis? We have to have Nazis if it's a Indiana Jones pulp fiction. Yep, check that off the list. All right, do we have eating monkey brains? Eating monkey brains that look like Jello. That's still the weirdest part of any Indiana Jones movie.
Those movies are very weird. There's some weird stuff that happens in the Uncharted games too, I think. I didn't like the sort of supernatural slant to them, but thinking back on it, and like I replayed them recently a few years ago, I was like, nah, this was pretty good.
Isn't there like a scene in Uncharted One where you go on like a Nazi U-boat and it's like haunted or something?
Yeah. It's like that's towards the beginning. Like there's a haunted Nazi U-boat. Yeah, definitely.
It's
So just checking them off the list. Gotta have Nazis.
Gotta have it on there. Are we on a Zeppelin and there's pterodactyls attacking? Check it off the list. Here we go.
Sony didn't have much of a hand in any of the like ideation process. At this point, they kind of trusted Naughty Dog to just make something great, and they weren't really in the habit of shutting down ideas from one of their top companies, their golden geese. They were a little bit scared, though, once they started settling on Uncharted, because it would be kind of hard to get a mascot out of a game like Uncharted. Crash is a cartoon character, easy mascot for the mid-90s. Jak and Daxter, cartoon characters, easy mascots for the early 2000s, right? But with Uncharted, and I think cartoon mascots were definitely going out of style by this point too, but with Uncharted, it was like, hey, here's this guy in jeans and a t-shirt, he's white and he has brown hair and he shoots a gun. Like there aren't 50 million of those dudes running around in every game out at this time, right? But what makes Nathan Drake like so great is his charm and his personality. Like that's what makes him stand out. And I think the writers do like a really good job of building a character that's really fun to play as, but also kind of believable when it comes to a storyline too. He grows and changes as the series evolves, and it's very good.
Also, you don't need a mascot. Maybe that's just Sony thinking in the past, you know?
Yeah, you kind of did back in the day, or at least I can understand why you would think that you needed one. Nowadays, you don't. Like, even like Nintendo has Mario because they will always have Mario, but like Sony doesn't really have anything anymore. They've got a staple of excellent games from excellent companies. Same with Microsoft, a bunch of excellent games from excellent companies, but no real standouts. Like maybe Master Chief, but there hasn't been a new Halo game in like 5 years, so he's hardly working on that mascot status at this point, you know?
Yeah, and it just makes me think that other games think about their games based on mascots. It's like Skyrim. All right, we got Ned the Nord. He's a Nord. He looks cartoony. He's our mascot.
Got him.
Boom. Next game.
Found our guy. The development period for Uncharted was the longest in the company's history. They were so enthralled with what the PS3 could do that it actually kind of got distracting. And they got really distracted in pushing the limits and finding. Then they found out they needed to scale back. If this were a visual podcast, this is where I put that picture of Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park when he says, "You were so preoccupied with whether you could that you didn't stop to think if you should." You know, they were just like, "What can we do with this awesome hardware? Let's do everything." Bah! Which is pretty exciting, and I think I would also fall into that trap probably if I were a programmer and somebody handed me a development kit for the PlayStation 5.
We need to find more ways to implement Jeff Goldblum into this podcast.
Yeah, I'm always trying, you know. The J engine also stands for Jeff Goldblum, J Cloud.
That's true.
Yep. Dynamic duo, John Glames, Jeff Goldblum.
Oh, unstoppable pair.
Mm-hmm. It also didn't help that Uncharted was like a very different genre from anything that they'd created before. Designers there were used to making platformers, and there were a lot of people who joined the studio to make games like Jak and Crash, and they were like kind of bummed when it became clear that like a third-person shooter was what they were working on next. It also didn't help that once the PS3 had come out, it was kind of an underdog in the early years of that generation. IGN's article notes that the PS1 and PS2 were both like unquestionably, they were the winners of their generation in terms of like sales and like by most metrics other than nostalgia. Like they're the winners of those generations. But the PlayStation 3 was kind of a joke for a while in the gaming community because remember, it was super expensive when it came out and there was like no good games for it. That's where that meme comes from. It has no games. PlayStation 3 has no games.
It's got no games.
That meme still persists to this day about the PlayStation 3, mostly because we keep saying it on this podcast.
Dude, someone actually tweeted me. Alive. Someone tweeted me that. Oh, yeah.
Has no games?
Chris tweeted me at Soma_drums, and it was a guy named Ant Dude saying, "Breaking news, Nintendo Switch has games."
Nintendo Switch does have games. It has lots of games.
It has lots of games now. Oh, didn't it have it had a rough start kind of in the beginning, right? Didn't have a lot of games in the beginning? Or did it? Am I wrong? Tell me I'm
Switch?
wrong. Yeah.
Switch had Breath of the Wild. That's all I needed for like a year.
That's a good point. You could play that game forever. Never mind.
Yeah.
As and you were, Nintendo.
Yeah. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Naughty Dog was sort of suffering from this not invented here syndrome, as they refer to it in the biz. That's where developers decide they can solve every problem themselves and it'll be way better than using someone else's tech to solve that problem. And so they were like making a lot of technology themselves that they ended up kind of having to throw away or swap out for more industry standard stuff. And it was just like They were really sort of figuring their stuff out at that point in time. And because what would happen is they would make something and they would be all excited about like this physics engine or this whatever. And then the person who made it would just leave. And then they'd be like, oh crap, none of us know how this thing works or how to make it any better or how to keep working on it. This is awful. And we probably should have just got something from somewhere else. So anyway, Naughty Dog had a bunch of trouble with that.
That's an issue.
But it is an issue. So it's hard to develop games when you keep throwing away everything you're using to develop these games. But once they started getting things on the screen and seeing some real progress on the graphics and gameplay, then like spirits and morale sort of got raised and were much higher. It was starting to become real that they would actually be able to make a game for the PS3. So Naughty Dog knew what the PS3 was capable and kind of what its major systems were, but they didn't have very many actual development kits. Really, the only one they had was like this sort of refrigerator-sized box that I guess did a lot of PlayStation 3 stuff. The dev kits were really limited supply in the days before the PlayStation 3 was out. And since Naughty Dog wasn't making a launch title, they weren't able to get very many kits. So what they did was they sort of did what they had done back in the old days on the Genesis. Remember when they built that game? I forget which game it was now, but they built one of their games, Rings of Power, I think. They built it on the PC, and then it was like, now they had to like sort of stuff it onto the Genesis. They kind of had to do the same thing with the PlayStation 3. They had made a lot of stuff for Uncharted on PC, and then once they got their actual PS3 dev kits, they were like, oh, these are not as good as we thought they would be. And so they had to strip a lot of things back, and they spent a lot of time sort of scaling things back when the PS3 just wasn't quite as powerful, or at least they weren't able to take advantage of it in the way that they wanted to, which is, a little bummer. Whoops.
A little bit of an oopsie.
Yeah. They also ran into other development problems with how realistic Uncharted was. Like with Jack, they could basically invent their own physics and laws of gravity and like make movement as cartoony and fun as they wanted. But with Uncharted, because it was so realistic, they sort of had to fit what felt realistic. It was very hard, and it was unlike anything they'd ever done before. So they used a method that's very common now, but was not quite as common at that point in time. They used a method called motion capture, where you like record actual people doing the thing, like in a weird motion capture suit, and it gets realistic movements for all their characters in Uncharted. It would also be super valuable to them when they made Last of Us, and even later Uncharted games, they would move on to performance capture, which we'll talk about in a minute. But with Uncharted, it felt kind of bad for their animators, especially animators who specialized in that like cartoony style that they had used for Crash and Jack. And there were a lot of animators there that threatened to quit over motion capture. And honestly, like, I can't say I blame them. They were basically being replaced by motion capture. And while it may have been the right choice for the project, I can definitely understand why that would feel bad and why you'd probably want to move on and go somewhere else if you felt like your job was becoming obsolete.
Yeah, it's sad. I totally get that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's like the changing of the times and technology. Because, I mean, there's still cartoony games that those people could work on, for sure. That's
right. Yeah, there's still plenty of stuff for them to do. It just kind of felt bad for them to be at Naughty Dog, where they had been doing this stuff for years, and then it was like, oh, we're not doing that anymore. We're doing something else. And they were like, oh, man.
Plus, we're also approaching the time of, like, Call of Duty, and they use mocap a lot.
Yeah, I think most games that have any sort of semblance of realism to them are using motion capture now.
Totally.
But yeah, Naughty Dog also changed systems a lot, like game systems within the game itself, like even right up to that demo at E3 2007. IGN's article says that about 2 months before the demo, they were still using this like locked on targeting system, kind of like the 3D Zelda titles with the Z targeting, or the Metroid Prime games where you kind of lock on to what you're shooting. But then like the last second, 2 months before E3, they pivoted to the cover-based system that the games are famous for now. But it kind of shows that even right up to the point where they're like getting ready to show this game off, they were still like not locked in on what they were going to be like making the game out of, which I think is very interesting and not surprising now that like we've got a bit more insight into like how games are made and stuff like that. But it's like, it sort of seems, especially when the final product comes out and it's great, it sort of seems like, oh man, they've got it together. They really know what they're doing. But a lot of game companies are like kind of flying by the seat of their pants and just like hoping that it works out. And some of them it does work out, and other ones it doesn't work out.
Totally. Yeah.
But they did it. They launched the game in November of 2007, and the rest, as they say, is history, and we're going to cover it. We've got a little bit more to go here.
Because we're a history podcast, and we can cover history. We're allowed by law to do that.
We are allowed by law. We have our history license.
John Glames, Esquire. He checked it out for us.
He did. Thank you, John. Uncharted didn't do super well right after it released, mostly because Sony didn't want to take the marketing gamble on it, which is kind of strange to me in hindsight because, considering how big this series is now, of course, Sony wants to advertise the crap out of it. But back then, and I remember when they were showing videos of it and stuff, I remember not being very excited for it and just being like, oh, it's a third-person shooter. It looks kind of like Tomb Raider. Neat. And so Sony didn't really want to take the gamble on marketing that. Their marketing muscle went towards more established games like Ratchet and Clank, Future Tools of Destruction. And then there was also, do you remember that one dragon game, Lair? That Sony was really pushing. It's a game where you played as dragons, and I've never really played it, but Sony was really pushing it. Like they thought it was going to be the coolest thing ever, and it just kind of was like, meh.
Lair.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia page of it right now. This looks very interesting.
Yeah. A lot of people over at Naughty Dog thought that with just a few more months of polish, they could have really made Uncharted a lot better. But honestly, it was still a pretty awesome game. It got solid reviews, not like stellar reviews, but it was like, oh yeah, this is a pretty good game, pretty fun. And a good game is a good game, and enough people bought it that it started to catch on kind of by word of mouth, which allowed them to get the green light for a sequel. And everyone at Naughty Dog was super stoked about making a sequel because during all of the just how hard it was making this, they threw away so much stuff. Like they had by the end, once they had got onto the track of making Uncharted, they had so many ideas for what they wanted to do. They just didn't have time to implement it all. So when they got the chance to make a sequel, they were like, oh yes, we're going to do something great. And you know what they ended up doing that they couldn't do in the first game?
What?
They made an awesome train level. Like the whole level takes place like you're like walking on the back of a train and like you're moving up and like killing dudes as like everything sort of flows by. There's a lot of great behind the scenes videos on YouTube of like how the train scene works behind the scenes, and it's incredible. It's very fascinating. But the problem was they wanted to do this train thing and they knew kind of what they wanted to do with this moving train sequence, but almost everything they had built for the game were not built to be used in that way of this like moving train system. So they weren't able to do it in the first game because they were like, well, we're going to have to redo this whole game if we're going to make this train level work. But now that they had the chance to make a second game, they wanted to make this train thing. And so they rewrote so much stuff for Uncharted 2's train level. They redesigned almost all of the systems from scratch so that they could handle being on a moving train. And it was insane, but it was totally worth it because that train scene is like one of my favorite set pieces in all of video games, and they were able to do a lot of other cool stuff too in Uncharted 2 and 3 with that, but like that is the piece de resistance, the magnum opus is that train level. It's very fun.
Man, you want to hear a weird thing about my life is I didn't even know Uncharted existed until Uncharted 2. I never heard about Uncharted 1 at all, which makes sense now that you're telling me they got a really bad marketing push.
Yeah, they really didn't do much at all. So you see that train level, like IGN's article they quoted somebody in there saying it was the first level we started and the last level we finished because of just how complex it was and how everything in the game had to be made around this level, which ultimately like turned out to be a really, really great idea. Another thing different about Uncharted 2 was that they went beyond just using motion capture for the animations. They did performance capture, which basically means that they got the actor who like does the voice of the characters, and they put them in the suit with all these weird like golf balls and stuff, and then they recorded getting the motion capture, but they also captured the voice at that time too. So they got like all the characters kind of in the same room too, and they basically just acted it out almost like it was a play or a TV show. And so they got really, really realistic performances that way, just because like being able to move your body in the way that your character is moving at the same time, like really just makes the voice also work really well. Plus it also got them the motion capture that they needed for the animations. It's so cool. And it's kind of standard, I think, these days for like a realistic story-driven game. But at the time, it was like this brand new technique that not very many game companies were using, and it got really, really good results.
That's awesome. I actually listened to a podcast about the new Call of Duty and how they did this for that story mode, performance capture, where they were acting out all the scenes.
Yeah, it's very cool. There's a lot of like behind the scenes videos for stuff like Beyond Two Souls and Last of Us, and probably Detroit Become Human. I'm sure is like this too, where you can see that the actors that they use, and it's like a pretty cool thing.
Nice.
And it gets pretty good results.
Yeah.
So Uncharted 1 had gotten pretty decent reviews. It was starting to get a lot of fan hype. So by the time Uncharted 2 had gotten the green light, Sony was like, okay, it's not a risk anymore. Uncharted 2 is going to be a hit. You're in, kid. And then they like just marketed the heck out of that game. It was like the sequel to like last summer's action blockbuster. Like everybody had to be there. And they got a lot of good feedback when they showed off Uncharted 2 at E3 in 2009. Everybody was stoked to see Nathan Drake's next chapter. And like beyond what I've already said about it, there's not like a whole lot to say about it, except that it's just super good. It's like, just feels great. All of the story pieces really work well together. It's not too long, which some games can get too long, you know? You really should just go play it. Even if all you can do is play that train sequence by itself. I think it still holds up really well today, and the characters feel good. And they like grow and change. They have good arcs, good relationships. It's very cool. I highly recommend it.
You heard it here first, folks. It's got the Tyler Osby's stamp of approval.
That's right. It also had multiplayer, which was a first for the series. Yeah, I remember it being decently fun. It didn't do anything like too out of the ordinary. It was, standard kind of third-person shooter. There's some deathmatch, some capture the flag. There's like some other kind of game modes. But it did have a progression system, which was a little bit more uncommon back then. But it was released after Call of Duty 4, which really popularized the whole like multiplayer progression system. So basically, like any game nowadays, if you don't have some sort of progression system in your multiplayer, like you goofed, nobody's going to play it.
Totally.
Yeah. I actually still have the beta for the Uncharted 2 multiplayer on my PS3 because I'm a weirdo and I keep stuff like that.
You heard it here first, folks. Tyler Osby, total weirdo.
Total weirdo. That's right. You heard it here first in episode 82 of our weekly podcast. Yeah, I actually have a lot of betas. I think I have the Uncharted 3 beta. I definitely have Bad Company 2 also, betas for that. I have the beta for MAG still on my PlayStation 3. Uncharted 2 won a ridiculous amount of awards in 2009. And like, I went back and kind of looked at lists of games from 2009. I think it could possibly be the best game of 2009. Except for maybe Left 4 Dead 2, because I just love Left 4 Dead 2 so much. And that also came out in 2009. So it was stiff competition. And also Arkham Asylum.
We could do a Left 4 Dead episode. What are we thinking?
We could. Yeah.
But and on the list.
Put Arkham Asylum. Put the Arkham series down, too. I love all those games. That also came out in 2009. It was awesome. So definitely the best way to play these games is the Nathan Drake collection on the PlayStation 4. Crispy 60 frames per second, full 1080p. They might do 4K on the PS4 Pro. I don't know. I haven't played it on my PS4 Pro, but it is buttery smooth. Highly recommend it. So play all of them that way. Speaking of, we have one more game to cover here, which is Uncharted 3. And there's not a whole lot to say there, except that this is where the studio, again, split into two. So there were two distinct teams going on at this point in time. One team making Uncharted 3, because they wanted to make Uncharted 3. They had lots of great ideas still left over from the parts list that Amy had put together. And Uncharted 2 had done so well that they knew it was kind of a slam dunk in terms of sales and stuff. Like, they were all passionate about it. But the other part of the studio wanted to work on The Last of Us. So they tried the whole split in the studio thing again. And I am assuming it worked better this time because they ended up having kind of two tracks of games coming out, with Uncharted 4 coming out just a little bit after The Last of Us came out. So they did that. Again, there's not a whole lot to say about Uncharted 3 that really covers any new ground, except that it's super good. It doesn't feel quite as good as Uncharted 2, because I think it's because Uncharted 2 was just so just surprising at how good it was when it came out, that when Uncharted 3 came out, it was like, oh yeah, this is great. It's just as good as Uncharted 2. I'm a little bummed it's not like far and away better. It's not the jump between Uncharted 1 and Uncharted 2 is so huge, and there's really no jump between Uncharted 2 and 3. It's just like, hey, you liked Uncharted 2? Well, Uncharted 3 is more of that. And so, like, it's great. It's very fun. It has a cool story. Like, the character's great. Gameplay's fun. But it's just wasn't quite that, like, almost like did you play BioShock 2?
I sure did.
I think it's just as good as the first game, maybe even a little better, but it was just not as surprising.
Yeah,
you know?
which is why BioShock Infinite was just so much like, whoa.
Yeah, BioShock Infinite did the surprising thing. So I love all of those games, but yeah, it was like kind of disappointing that they didn't top themselves. So it goes a little bit more into Nathan's backstory. There's a few segments where you play as him as a child and him meeting Sully, and like that's really fun. There's also a level, I'm pretty sure this is Uncharted 3. There's a level where he gets drugged. And there's like a whole acid trip sequence that's related to that. That's like pretty fun. But at this point, they kind of had the formula dialed in, and so they just sort of executed and made Uncharted 2, and it was great. Yeah.
Uncharted 2 off the charts.
That's right. Uncharted 2, Nathan Drake's ballet recital. So this is kind of where the IGN article leaves the history of Naughty Dog, and I think it's a good place for us to do that too, mostly because we try to cover video game history on this show, and now that we're sort of spilling into this decade, where I want to shy away from it. Also, anything that I would be able to find on my own is not as good as anything IGN can get. They had like interviews and stuff with all these companies, and wow, I mean, we're a pretty big deal. We can't quite get those interviews that IGN was able to get.
So what you're saying is people should go read the IGN article if they're more interested.
Yeah, they should. If you're interested, if you liked what we did, the IGN article has a lot more detail and stuff like that. So like, I want to be clear that we pilfered a lot from that article, and it's very good, and you should go read it.
Yeah, we do not work for them, though. They give us no money at all.
That's right. They give us zero money. But yeah, play all the Uncharted games. They're awesome. Also, play Last of Us. It's very good, too. It's also great. So, yeah. What you been playing, Mike?
So, I haven't been playing a lot other than Destiny this week. Played a lot of Destiny this week because you and I are trying to get titles.
That's right. We're going for this season's title.
But I do have some emails and reviews, so I'm wondering if we should go to what you've been playing first, and then I'll do those. So what have you been playing, Tyler?
Well, I've been playing a lot of Destiny. As you said, I'm still working on Modern Warfare. I didn't play any Link's Awakening. I'm saving that. I'm going back home this weekend, so I'm saving some Switch games for the old portable, so I can play them in the car ride or at home where I don't have all my cool setup. So yeah, I think that's basically all I've been playing. Let me check I keep a list of games I'm working on because I am weird like that. You have
a Trello board, if I recall.
I do have a Trello board. Oh, I was kind of working on Halo Reach a little bit. But yeah, that's about it. That's all I've been working on. I got a lot of games on deck that I want to be playing soon, especially during winter break. I get a couple of weeks off of work, which is very nice. I plan to dig into the backlog and make some changes there. But you said you got some emails?
I got some emails and I got a review. Let's do the emails first. So this email came in from Steve Areno. He's a buddy of Areno. He's emailed us before. He says, hey, the store shelf handheld games you were talking about in the horror game episode are Tiger Electronic games. They even had watches and sometimes cost almost as much as a new game. They lasted until 2012. Wow. And then he goes on to say, he forgot to add that they eventually tried to make a real handheld console, the Game.com, and it was
I remember that.
Awful. That's what he described.
Truly terrible.
They had games such as Resident Evil 2 and Mortal Kombat, and I believe you could connect to the internet. They also attempted to make another handheld game system, he puts that in quotes, called the R-Zone. Imagine a headband with what looks like a scanner from Dragon Ball Z over one eye, and the graphics were bright red, and were literally just the bad Tiger games in one eye.
I remember that too. Okay. I had a friend who had one of those, and he was like the kid that always got the new cool thing, and he had one of those, and everybody was like, whoa, but then he only played it like twice, I think. But yeah, I remember that existing.
He also says there's a controller that would attach to it. And he said, hope we look up the ridiculousness of these consoles. I'm going to do it because I actually I moved in with my lady friend, and I found a Tiger Electronics handheld for Batman the Animated Series. I'll probably take a picture of it and put it on my Instagram because I was like, whoa.
That's so great.
I also don't know if it even works still. But yeah, I definitely found one of those. Also, Steve says, P.S. My parents aren't cool, very lame, very divorced, one of them 3 times over. I think that's a joke callback to when we were talking about how cool your parents are.
My parents are pretty cool.
They are pretty cool. The other game, we got an email from Mo. I didn't ask Mo to read this on the air. I'm just doing it. So sorry, Mo. Here we go. Tyler and Mike, first, thanks for all of your work on the Codex History podcast. I recently discovered the podcast and have been working my way through from the beginning on my long commute to work. I'm thrilled to see that you're still going strong. Thank you, Mo. It's a great history podcast. I've learned a ton about video games history, and you two crack me up all the time. I have to say, though, I don't remember a time that I've laughed harder than when Tyler was talking about leveling a new character in World of Warcraft at the end of episode 12. He said something along the lines of, WoW is great once you're 200 hours in, but for now, we just need you to get some spider butts. I forgot about that. He said,
I'd stand by that.
It's true. It's true. Lol. Lol. I was cackling so loud in my car on the way to work for what felt like 2 or 3 minutes. I thought I might need to pull over. I don't know what it is about spider butts that had me roaring. It really is absurd how many silly little fetch quests there are in WoW. Spider butts for the win.
Oh my gosh. It's so bad. And this translates into Final Fantasy 14 too, because by the third expansion of Final Fantasy 14, you've saved the universe like a billion times or whatever. And it's like, there's still people in town that are like, hey, can you like go pick my crops for me? And they're like, you're just standing here doing nothing. I'm the warrior of light. I have saved the universe. And you need me to go get spider butts for you. It's like, oh, gosh.
Mo goes on to say, thanks for the great podcast and all the laughs. Spider butts, Mo.
Thanks, Mo.
Thank you so much, everyone that's emailed in. Really appreciate it. We also get reviews on the old Apple Podcasts. And here my phone's doing Face ID and it's not doing it very well. This review came from Mayan Swab on Wednesday. 5 stars. I approve. Really digging this so far. I'm about halfway through them all. Pretty good knowledge. Lots of Jaybird facts. Let's get more TG16 or Sega Saturn talk up in this mother. And I think that's right.
Okay.
We kind of did some Sega Saturn stuff. I think we did Sega Saturn and Sega Saturn games, if I recall. Did we do those 2 episodes?
Yeah, I think so.
But we could probably go back to Sega Saturn and TG16. I put it in the episode ideas, and that
let's buy a TurboGrafx, let's buy a Saturn, and then we'll just sit down and just play all these games.
Yep, together.
Just do it.
Fly down there. Or we'll meet in the mutual location in between Los Angeles and Seattle. Redding, California? I don't really know.
That's the halfway point.
That's the halfway point. But yeah, you can find, as always, you can tweet at me or Tyler on Twitter. That's where you tweet at. If you didn't know it, you do that there. Oh, this is going great so far. At Sneaker Elf, ELPH. That's how you get a hold of Tyler. I'm at me Coletta. We are doing episodes every week. Next week, we got another one. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Surprises.
Oh, it's exciting.
Surprises. But you can always rate and review and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us out a ton. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye, Tyler.
Goodbye, Mike.